By bell, by grave, by candle's flame, beauty is bound, cruelty slain. This is V Cosmetics. Vegan, occult, and always witchcrafted. Use the code BELLWITCH at vecosmetics.com to claim your power. Matriarchy, reign on me. Women are my safe space and my sanctuary. In a world that calls me obscenities because I disagree, where statues are fondled inappropriately because it's a photograph opportunity, let the matriarchy reign upon me, where women spin yarns of love around the children of us, keep them safe and heard in a world of upskirting, unbalance and misuse of the word bird. If I had feathers, they would not permit me to fly. Let the matriarchy reign upon me, where the blood of the moon would be celebrated as life, a ritual of birth. The calendar would revert, and blood would be repulsive when caused only by the knife. Let the matriarchy reign upon me. In a world where more research is done on pigeons than the womb space, that is responsible for the whole of this race. Yet the womb is a weakness, an inconvenience, sometimes to be blamed for our fire and prudence. Let the matriarchy reign upon me, in a world where my status and title mirror the man that I am with, where I am always on guard with the keys in my hand, and an alarm to deafen them with. Let the matriarchy reign upon them, when they realise they need a friend, someone to slow the aggression, ease the anger, and avoid some catastrophic disaster. When wars break out and our children are abused, and nothing is being done, will we fear and run, or will we raise our hand and refuse the state of the land, and reject the patriarchy, and make a stand? And let the matriarchy reign upon us, all throughout the land. Now then, witches and beautiful souls, welcome to the Bell Witch podcast with me, Swailes, a friendly green witch. A show that aims to get you witched in the 21st century. Thank you for coming here today to listen to this fabulous Moot Loot. The guest you will have heard recently, it is the lovely Katherine from Orange Blossom Aldways. I recorded some weeks back where Katherine came on and spoke to us about the Alternatives Healing Festival in Ilkley. Prior to that, we actually had such a deep conversation, so it felt right to split the interview into two parts because they were just so different. She is such a passionate witch. She talks about her history at the Pendle Hill and all that brings to her shamanic practice and supporting other people, what she offers in journeying. It flowed naturally, and we were both quite passionate about similar things, and we've had similar birth stories, and I think we feel quite similar in terms of the world right now. I have to give you a content warning. This is probably the most serious conversation I've ever had on the podcast. It is political because witchcraft is political. Women being killed for believing certain things, for being in certain communities, for owning land, and having knowledge that the patriarchy didn't like, and knowing herbs and delivering each other's babies. It is still going on today, not necessarily as it was then in terms of being accused, tried and tortured openly. However, the wars that are currently going on around the world and the genocide really do mirror the burning times. We're still suffering under the patriarchal system. And this comes up a lot in the following discussion. And it is a very personal conversation with Katherine where we talk about women's bodies, feminism, the beautiful act of finding witchcraft after giving birth, how kids need to be centred in the matriarchal system. It is heavy, but I think it's a conversation that is greatly needed in this day and age. So enjoy and look after yourself. Self-care is paramount. Now then, listeners and beautiful souls, welcome to another Moot Loot episode with fantastic guests that come on the Bell Witch podcast to share with us the pearls of wisdom and their gems of knowledge. Today, I have a fabulous lass who I've swum in the same circles with for over a decade now, I believe. She describes herself as a shamanic practitioner, witch, creatrix, writer, space and circle holder, and a glorious mother of beautiful witchlings. May I introduce to you Katherine Lucy Haworth of Orange Blossom Ways. That's right, isn't it? No, it's wrong, isn't it?
Orange Blossom Old Ways.
Orange Blossom Old Ways. There we go. Got there in the end. Welcome to the Bell Witch.
Hello, Emma. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here.
And you're on holiday, might I add. Listener, how impressive is that? She's actually on holiday and she's here talking to me on a podcast. So, can you tell us a little bit about your witching and your history and what kind of witch you are?
I was born in Accrington, a little old cotton town, a mill town, and my parents have lived in a tiny village called Copster Green ever since I was 6. In this area and in my ancestry, we've never been away from Pendle Hill. Pendle Hill you could see from my nanny and granddad's garden, which is where I feel like my nanny and granddad's garden, feel like that garden somehow was my ancestral home. So you could see Pendle from the end of the garden. And they had 2 beautiful silver birches that had grown. By the time my nanny died, they'd grown taller than the house. And there was a pond there it wasn't like a grand pond. It was a tiny little pond. But watching the frogs in that pond was just like pure magic to me. And the smell of tomatoes in my granddad's greenhouse. Both of my grandparents were Scorpios. Granddad on the 11th of November, nanny on the 12th. One of those silver birches my granddad had took a fancy to when they were in the Lake District, so he just dug it up, took it home, and this silver birch grew taller than the house. And I feel like that is the beginning, really, of my spiritual journey. These 2 silver birches and the frogs in the pond and the smell of the tomatoes in the greenhouse. None of that was presented to me as this is your spiritual path. My nanny would have called this silly work. Katherine, give over with your silly work. But my grandmother's mother, my great-grandmother, she read the tea leaves and was in the spiritualist church. Whereas my nanny was like, oh no, that's not for her. But I feel like somehow it was in me. It's really very much for me. It's like in the earth and in the environment. I remember going up to Newchurch and being fascinated by this shop called Witches Galore, and there were these kind of models of witches sitting outside. But the magic for me is in the land. It is in the land and in the changing seasons and in the trees and the stars. But I feel like it's never not been in me, but there's been a gradual returning to that sort of heart of me. I feel like I spent quite a lot of my time being disconnected from myself and the pressures of, what is a girl, what's important to a girl. I feel like I did quite a lot of trying to fit in or be accepted and put importance on the opinions of people whose opinions weren't actually retrospectively that important. I found like I lost my own voice for quite a time, I think. But this part of me was always there that I would sort of describe as my spirit or my soul. And there's something here in the it's not here is not it's not a sunny place, but Pendle Hill, every time you drive past her, she changes. So sometimes she'll look like a sleeping lioness and all glowing and golden. Sometimes she'll be like deep purple. The wind up there is like nothing else, and there's like an ever-changing sky there, and that is what I feel is my spiritual home. And I do not feel like those women who were accused of witchcraft and who were tortured and who were led to Lancaster, I feel like they are, for those of us who have been born and brought up here, I feel like they're in our lineage as our ancestors of affinity. So when I describe myself as a witch, that is a reclaiming of something that was used to persecute and shame and ultimately imprison, torture, murder these women who, to my mind, were entirely innocent, and maybe they were poor. Usually they were poor. Maybe some of them were single mothers like me. And so honouring them is really, really important to me. So not as some kind of, this is like a trendy thing to do. Like those women are in my heart. I make no mistake that the kind of witch trials, burning times go on today in a numerous amount of ways. That might be how, women who are raped are treated. It might be how women who were wrapped up in a family court battle are treated. And indeed, it might be the children in certain places in this world who are still accused of witchcraft and taken away from their parents or left by the sides of the road. There's this wonderful organisation called Land of Hope, and those children were accused of witchcraft and often tortured, battered, left for dead by the side of the road, starved. So I don't do any of this from a form of like lightness or fluffiness. It's really, really in my heart. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's something in that landscape that I just trust, but it isn't an easy landscape. It's not like a holiday. Do you know what I mean? It's really, the wind is strong. It's constantly changing. There's something there. There's a wildness on Pendle that is completely untamable. And I feel like if I was to honour anything, it's the wild, untamed.
Were you aware of the history growing up of the witch trials?
No, we just knew the witches are up there, but not so much the witch trials. And then I'm quite fascinated by this. Like I went to university at Lancaster, and I've been doing quite a lot of work recently about going back there to Lancaster and almost kind of, as I would see it, collecting pieces of my soul that were lost there. And part of that has been going to the castle where those women were taken, they were imprisoned. So I came to the knowledge of the history, her story, later in life. And it was more of a felt instinctual sense of that place for me. But I've been deeply, deeply involved in this. I've been writing stories as yet unfinished. The main one's called If You're Accused of Being a Witch, You Might As Well Be Dead, since I was 17 years old, when I was learning then in sociology about how if a woman drowned, she was seen as innocent, and if she survived being drowned, she was found guilty. So that's where that title comes from. If you're accused of being a witch, you might as well be dead. And I think there are threads and threads of that. And it's really interesting to read some of the history at Lancaster Castle right at this moment. They will say things like, this boasts the place of where the man who was in charge of the Pendle Witches is. That shouldn't be something that we boast about. What was done to those women was, and there were, I think, 2 men, was just beyond words, disgusting torture and murder and abuse. And we're obviously seeing that in many areas of the world right now, where there's an absolute disregard for human life and humanity, and how sacred. Every woman, every baby, every mother, every father, every grandfather, grandmother. Our lives are sacred. The life of a baby here is as sacred as the life of a baby anywhere. I've become much more aware of the in-depth history, her story, over the last decade, 15 years, but the conceptualization of a witch and punishment and being thrown out, I'm very aware of since probably around sort of 17.
Yeah, we've got in common having a baby enlightened our soul, didn't it?
Absolutely. So I would say from the ages of 14 to about 30, not in all ways, but in many ways, I feel like I was quite absent from my own body. So I'd found plenty of ways of disconnecting with myself, I think because there was probably quite a lot of pain in me and my experiences, and places where I'd learnt to hold shame and secrecy, places where I hadn't been treated well but I didn't feel able to speak out about it, and probably spending a bit too much time, what shall we say, drinking peach wine or something. So when I gave birth to Sol, I had already discovered my counselling path, the therapeutic path, which for me has always been guided by the person-centred approach. When I moved to Leeds in 1998, I quickly discovered an organisation called the Marketplace, and when I met there with I remember meeting the boss at the time, Sally. She treated like the head of social services in exactly the same respectful way as she treated a 13-year-old. And it was like the person-centred approach, absolutely, in practical living form. And that was the first place where they ever taught me that if you were fit, because I was a volunteer there in the drop-in, and they taught me that you didn't need to make it up that you were feeling poorly. If you were just really, really stressed out or really unhappy or feeling really anxious, that was a real thing and it mattered. So they taught me really to honour, accept, tune into my own emotional, mental health well-being, and that was something that ran through that organisation. And then from there, I went to work in a crisis centre, which was also person-centred and survivor-led, which was a kind of revolutionary place called Leeds Survivor-Led Crisis Centre. That work taught me so much, and it taught me a massive dose of being humble. Both of those organisations were set up to really honour someone's humanity above all else. So I was working at both of those places when in 2007 I'd become pregnant. I'd always said I wanted to be pregnant when I was 30, and on my 30th birthday, 1st of Feb, I was like trying to drink some pink wine, and I thought, I don't like the taste of this. Anyway, a few days later, 12th of Feb, found out I was pregnant, and I was just over the moon. I was completely over the moon, and I knew that I wanted a home birth, and I had this beautiful midwife called Leslie who had like silver hair, and she was a Libran herself. My son is a Libran. She just said to me, she said, there's no reason why home birth shouldn't be as safe, if not safer, than birthing in the hospital. And she really supported me after the first people who I said I wanted a home birth to didn't. As it was, of course, my firstborn son, who I didn't know was a son till he was born, was late. Like, I've never been on time for anything, I don't think, in my life. Indeed, my own birth, I was 15 days late, I think. My dad was in the pub, uncontactable, because there weren't mobile phones in that day. Bless my mum. That's a bit of a bad statement about my dad. He wasn't like a big drinker. He was just a drinker. So I gave birth in what was a flat at the time in Hare Hills. He was about 2 weeks, going towards 2 weeks late. They'd booked me in for an induction, even though I didn't want an induction. And he was born on the 6th of October, and me and his father a few years ago had watched our cat giving birth to kittens, and there was this part in the birth where he said, Rani's done it, so can you, because we watched her just kind of go meow, and then a baby would be born, and then she'd sort of lick the baby into life.
Aww.
And the midwife, who was called Claire, she was a Leo as well, and she said it was watching her cat give birth that made her want to become a midwife. So there was a lot of that kind of cat energy there. Anyway, I gave birth to him, and it was a Saturday. And because it was a Saturday, my waters had already broken. And they were like, because it was a Saturday, they didn't sort of try to shove me into the hospital because it would have been inconvenient to them. Anyway, so I gave birth on the sofa, didn't have a pool or anything, in the middle of Hare Hills, and it was about 6:05 in the morning, and the birds were singing and the sun was coming up golden, and I had like my little sparkly crystals at the window. It was literally, when I birthed him into this world, I feel like I fully came back into my body. For the first time in a really long time, I really fully trusted myself. I felt so proud of myself. I felt like I've done it. I can do it. I felt so proud of my body. And though it wasn't like people were unkind to me, but I feel like I'd always been very critical, or, you know, those kind of, you know, what magazines of supermodels that I used to look at when I was like a 12, 13-year-old girl. And so that comparison to other people stopped, and I feel like I came back into my body as I birthed him into the world. And I feel like I wouldn't have had the words for it then, but that was the greatest shamanic experience of my life. And I feel like I birthed my son and I birthed myself in that moment. From then on, I felt far less afraid to do things like small things. Like I'd wanted to go to Five Rhythms for years, and I used to collect all the flyers from Swarthmore College. And then once I'd given birth to Sol, I thought, I've given birth, I can go to Five Rhythms. And of course, they were just really nice and really welcoming, and there was nothing to be scared of. But beforehand, I was scared. So that was the greatest shamanic initiation of my whole life. That was the greatest initiation of my life. And that day, my mum and dad came by lunchtime. My best friends from school, 3 of them came with their children. And we're all the ones who grew up with Pendle Hill right there. And it was just like a party. It was completely...
Aww. So lucky to have that for your first birth. That is amazing achievement. I had a home birth for my second birth, but my first birth was really traumatic, and that's why I ended up having a home birth, which was, like you say, one of the best experiences, probably the best experience of my life, because I didn't even have a midwife. I just did it, and it was incredible.
Amazing. And yeah, just like honouring also the trauma of the first birth. But Jane Hardwick Collins, who is one of the teachers who I really love, she says whatever happens in that birth, it teaches us what we most need to know at that time. Like each birth teaches us. Yeah.
Birthing like a goddess.
I also feel a few days later, they were like, right, we've booked you in for your induction, completely against my will. And I said, well, I've already had the baby. And they said, where? I said, on the sofa. And they went, oh, right. There was something about the type of things that would have been said to me. If I had not trusted my instincts, you know, they would say, oh, your waters have broken. I remember having this conversation. I'm not a scientist. And that they said, oh, your waters have broken. They'll want you to go into hospital because of the risk of infection. And I said, well, is there not more risk of infection in the hospital than there is in my home? And they said, yes, it's just the procedure. So that was what really taught me to hone my voice, because reading these things, there's so much within maternity and birth and what you eat when you're pregnant and all that kind of thing that would suggest that you have absolutely no choice. So there's something about finding my own voice and coming back into my own body that's deeply connected with childbirth. And to this day, I mean, the way that women are birthing their babies from maybe 2020 to now, the utter harm that's being done to women in that most sacred moment of life, when we are simultaneously at our most vulnerable and our most powerful, is just, you know, beyond anything. Like cesarean rates, intervention rates are going up. And the trauma that women are experiencing in that field at this time is off the scale.
Being disempowered, yeah. Yeah, no, I absolutely
that moment
agree with that.
when we are literally bringing life into this world, you know, I think there are many reasons for that, and I think they all connect in with, you know, the witch trials or the burning times or whatever we want to call it, because women bring birth into this life.
And we should be celebrated for it and empowered by it and really valued. And we're just not. It has to change.
I feel like a massive part of all of my work is meeting women and other people, children and girls, on those thresholds and honouring them. And really often, I mean, I've worked with so many women, both in birth preparation and then processing births afterwards. And if a woman isn't met with respect and kindness, and that could well mean with a cesarean, a cesarean can be done in a way that's gentle and loving and kind and respectful. But if she's not met with those things, it's really, really likely that some part of her soul will leave her body, just in the way that what I feel like happened to me was, it was like, my soul came right back into my body.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. Oh my God, amazing. So your work then is all about mothers and babies, is that correct?
No, that will form a big portion of my work. So I'm a shamanic practitioner, I'm a constellations practitioner, and I'm now a shamanic teacher. All of those words are useful, but I feel like in my heart, the sort of lineage that I connect with is myself as a witch of this land, not of a different land. I would love to gather and do gather the mugwort, the blackthorn, the lavender, the rosemary, these old ways. That is my way, the old ways, the kind of keeping and the reclaiming of the old ways and of magic in everyday life, every level. That is the heart of my work, is the reconnection, the reclaiming of magic in everyday life, and not out there, not like somebody else is doing it, not in somebody else's culture, like those trees at the bottom of my nanny and granddad's back garden. Or I had an Auntie Dorothy in Rotten Stall where I was yesterday. Every time we went into town, she used to let me stop and talk to the river. She'd just stand next to me whilst I told the river exactly where we were going, and then we'd go to this little cafe called Kettles On. Then we'd come back and she'd have bought me these treats and I'd show them all to the river one by one. My mum told me this week that once King Charles was there, but he was then the prince. I'm not at all into any of these people in the slightest, but I just carried on talking to the river when he came, and everybody was like waving the flags. So I'm very happy that this kind of no respect for royalty was with me then. So my work is, I do one-to-one work, and that can be kind of anything from a sort of classical shamanic perspective, really, which might involve, for example, soul retrieval, ancestral healing, cord cutting type of work. But everything that I do has a really strong element of ceremony. So I would describe myself probably as a ceremonialist as well, which isn't always the way for shamanic work. I've got a deep preference for doing it in person, especially for the first session. And the constellations work is a beautiful deepening of my practice that's come from my teacher, Carrie Day, who prefers to be called an educator. So I do one-to-one. I do a lot of group works. I'm currently running a 13-moon shamanic initiation called Blackthorn Beginnings, which has been the best thing that I've ever done. So we're following the blackthorn through the year. Last time we were making essences with the blackthorn blossom, but we were also journeying to our maiden self and really looking at our menarche, our first bleed, how that was and what stories that showed us about what it is to become a woman. And we were looking at our first consensual sexual experience and kind of being also with the blossom. And then in the winter we were with the crone and the caliac and the blackthorn. So we're following that right round the year, and I have called that 13 moon initiation. And let me tell you, there's been times when I wish I hadn't called it an initiation, because I've been like, oh my God, like initiation after initiation after initiation has been coming. I will be running a shamanic training program that will be a kind of professional qualification leading to people being able to go out as shamanic practitioners. And one of the things I'm really grateful for that is having a 20-year-old history of being a person-centered therapist and offering supervision and management and training, because that is something that can be lacking in this realm. So that coming from a really ethical framework and a background and honouring autonomy in every person and choice and wanting power with somebody, not power over somebody. When you're offering work that is very powerful, it's really important to remember that I'm not doing that to somebody. I am holding a space where they can get in touch with the power of their own spirit or soul. So yeah, I do a lot of work with women, but I also work with men and children. I was talking to you earlier about the Rebel Girls, which is a program that, again, a 13 moon kind of initiation really for girls. And this came into being from my dear friend Lucy Thompson dreaming it in one dark Scorpio moon. And we wanted a space where girls, as they met their menarche or approached their menarche, their first bleed, were acknowledging themselves as sacred, that they were honouring their bodies as sacred, that they were honouring their voice. They're sacred, yes, to whatever it is they want to pursue, their creative ways, their art, their gym, their poetry, whatever it is that sets them alight. But also they're sacred, no, without having to apologise or explain, because I feel like not having a sacred no for me was something that led to me really coming separate to my own sense of agency. So that's been a beautiful programme. There's creativity on there. Their journey, they meet their power animal, but there's a great deal of like, whose body is this? I am the queen of my body. And that whole thing about, just, I suppose, in a way, like consent itself being something that's really sacred. And that our bleeding and our cycles isn't just a biological function of the womb lining falling out. It's also a chance to release any pain, any sadness, any grief, any self-doubt that we might be carrying. And that just like the seasons, there is a time that we should be resting. There is a time when we should be dreaming. There's a time when we're going to be like the full moon or like the blossoming flowers. There's going to be a time, when we're wanting time alone. There's going to be a time when we're when we're like a bunch of daffodils or daisies and we want to be out dancing. And just an honouring of those, respect for our inner cycles, just as we honour the seasons. So I feel like that sits pretty near the core of my work as well. There's a time for dreaming, there's a time for dancing, and just that the only person who can say when that time is you, is me, is this 12-year-old girl, is this 78-year-old woman, like that self-honouring, self-autonomy.
I love your work. It sounds so beautifully varied and very unique. And these conversations, we need to have them. Really need to change the way things are going. Like, boo, patriarchy.
Absolutely. The patriarchy, the constructs of white supremacy, the constructs of, of this so-called billionaire class, and the utter horror shows that are being shown to us all of the time. I think partly with the intention of making us feel completely disempowered, because we're continually being shown that this is what the most powerful men in the world have done and there is no justice. And I feel like, these are the times that we're living in, and what can we come back to? What can we come back to? I read a poem recently. I go to a writing group in the park with this wonderful woman called Gail Johnson in York. And the poem started off, no one told the snowdrops. And it was like nobody told them not to bother. Nobody told them how bad the world was. It was much more poetic than I'm saying. I'll send you the poem afterwards.
And Katherine did. So I shall read it out at the end of this episode. Then I've bookended this heavy episode with beautiful poetry.
But it was like nobody told the snowdrops how bad things were. So how can we grow and come up through that cold, dark earth whenever our own time is, and be alive to the beauty and the joy and the warmth, whilst being equally not turning away from the suffering of the mothers? This is another thing in the birthing world, people who support women in birth. The whole idea that women are sacred and their birth is sacred and their babies are sacred. People can become really silent when it comes to the babies in Gaza being equally sacred. The babies in the Congo, the babies who are being born in refugee camps, the mother's milk has dried up because she's been starved, basically. I feel like there's what you're talking about. There's almost an element of this sort of fight for social justice, the patriarchy and then the white supremacy that sits around that, and the colonialization that, that's in all of our history and her story. And then when we think about how that impacted those women who were accused of being witches, not the women who are now claiming back that title like us, they were also victims of all of that stuff. And there was often a healthy dose of racism thrown in for the travelling people, and on and on and on it goes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's so depressing when you look into it. Every so often I have to just take a breather and step back because it is so massive and it consumes us all. And there's a few of
Absolutely,
us
absolutely.
around the world, trying to turn it on its head and do us work and speak up for people marginalised. But it is just so, so hard and very demanding, and it'll drain you.
Absolutely. And what I've found, especially in these last 3 years, being as, I don't know, for whatever reason, for the last 20 odd years, I've been really connected with the Palestinian people. Like, they've just got a really special place in my heart. And in fact, I found an article that I'd sort of cut out of a newspaper, the one that you get free on the bus, and it was horrendous. It was horrendous. It was 3 little boys who'd been killed in 2007. They were just covered in ash. I couldn't leave them on the bus. I had to take this thing home and wrap them up and write prayers over it. And obviously I couldn't bring them back, but I couldn't leave them on the bus either. These tiny little, beautiful, perfect ash-covered bodies. And what I found over the last 2.5 years was I was going into a place, I never watch the news and I never look at newspapers, but I do follow people who are living in different places on social media. But what I found was, for a good part of 2 years, I just completely froze. I literally froze with trauma. There were days when every single day I just cried, because I think being shown the level of depravity and lack of any honour for human life, for babies, for these sacred, beautiful babies who are entirely as deserving as any of our babies. And I feel like my children aren't safe whilst these children aren't safe, because where are the structures? Where are the institutions of justice, of protection, of love, of right responsibility, of accountability? Where are those pillars of goodness? I think that whatever each individual needs to do to be able to reconnect with our heart and our core, and sometimes I think that we were never designed, our nervous systems were never designed to take in the endless horror of the world. So if we're to look at Gaza or the Congo or the Yemen, all of these places, the places where the children are digging up the stuff for our mobile, it's completely endless. But no one person's nervous system is designed to sit with that much fear. And likewise with the lady Giselle, and then all of this horror that's coming into a more public view around, whatever you want to call them, a paedophilic elite. I don't think I want to call them an elite bunch of depraved horror shows. That is too much for somebody who's still got to get the children up for school, who's still got to make sure they've had the tea. And for me, I'm a single mother to 4 children, so finding any balance in this is really hard. And where I find it always is in nature. It's in the wind. It's in the little red robin that's singing on the top of my house that I think is my granddad singing to my nanny. It's in the trees are still blossoming. It's in the blackthorn coming to life and the bees there. And I met this beautiful 79-year-old woman who was taking photographs of the butterflies on the blackthorn when we were doing the blackthorn beginnings. So yeah, it's just, I don't know. How do we find balance? How do we? Because we've got to, haven't we? We've got to keep living.
We've got to be aware, but it's how much can you be aware of it at one time? What you've described recently, I would say last year, I did freeze and really suffer with it because I was researching and trying to be a good ally and walking the walk as well as talking the talk. And then I had a sheer moment of horror that lasted ages. Oh my God, I've got 2 little girls. I brought 2 little girls into this world. How am I going to cope with this? It was absolutely soul shaking. It was terrible.
I really, really hear you. And that moment of, did you describe it as a moment of horror?
Yeah.
I remember once going, I can't remember, I think it was with Dial House. They took us to a conference called Where is Hope? And there was an incredible woman there called Viv Masters. This is I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. And I think it was actually at the retreat in York, which is now near where I live. This conference was run by this woman called Viv Masters, who'd suffered the most horrific ritual abuse as a child. During her journey, she'd been treated sometimes horrifically by psychiatrists, and she'd sometimes been treated really well. You know, what we would call core conditions with, you know, loving kindness and respect and unconditional positive regard. And there was a lot of her artwork up on the walls. And one of the psychiatrists who came to speak, I can't remember his name, but he was a really, really wonderful man. And one of the things that he said was that working with this level of trauma and abuse, he'd one day been going home from work on a train or a bus, and he was suddenly filled with and froze in absolute terror that the abusers of the woman he was working with were going to track down his children and kill them before he got home, you know, that kind of thing. And I feel like that is a really human response, because we're being shown that these children, for example, it's not just children, but the children are not being treated as sacred. Their lives are not being valued. I'm being shown that again and again and again. And then how are we meant to trust that our children are always going to be treated as sacred? Because of course they're not. Our children aren't more sacred than the children of Gaza or the Congo, are they? All children are sacred. So I think that those moments of horror and terror, we really need to talk about them more so that we can become unfrozen together. And that would usually be by our kind of joined up humanity. In that moment, that man had experienced that. And I've never forgotten him talking about that, being gripped by complete terror on his way home, that they were going to get his kids.
Terror and like hopelessness. And regret as well, like, and guilt. I felt guilty that I'd brought them in. Do you know, we're dealing with all this BS. They're going to grow up in a world like this. Like, it's such a weird feeling, because I love my kids. I want them to have the best life they can. But then there's all this going on. It's like,
Absolutely. I really hear you. I was writing a poem the other day, and I said something like about my daughter, Luna, I will not let you be tortured. And then I didn't kind of allow that to be put anywhere in the world, because I thought, you know, what guarantee do I have? How could I stop it? It's not like the women who are experiencing this want it for their kids. And I think the truth is, Emma, it's deeply terrifying.
Yeah. Matriarchy, where are you? Come and save us. Rain on me.
I think that model of the matriarchy as a place, because patriarchy causes as much pain and suffering to men and boys, disconnection, harm, as it does to women. As a woman who's bringing up 3 beautiful, beautiful boys, Sol heading into young manhood. I don't think he'll get there till he's 21, but there we go. I think the matriarchy is one of those models where there is hope, because it is the honouring of life, really.
Centering of children and protection of children. We need that. Oh my God, heavy.
And growing the herbs. And, you know, when I think of that beautiful midwife, Leslie, when I was about to bring Sol into the world, there is the hope, I think. There is the hope. And we've got to keep looking for it, haven't we?
What is the alternative?
Part of that hope for me, I think, is holding a space for the massive amount of grief that we're all carrying. Because to pretend that we're not carrying grief in the face of these horrors is another version of patriarchy. It's another version of colonialisation. Like we are all suffering whilst this level of unchecked horror and abuse is allowed to go on in the world. So I feel like making space for our feelings, for the grief and the powerless, and then the coming together, just like in this conversation actually, is part of that matriarchy. I really feel that.
Dear listener, I hope you were all right. I was well aware how heavy this interview became. The older I get, the more passionate I feel, especially because I have 2 little girls. And we feel safe and a little bit powerful within the matriarchal gatherings of women camping paganism, witchcraft and magic. Circles that centre young people, children, trans kids. And if anybody has a problem with the matriarchy system, I go, but why? It's not about status, it's not about control or money, how rich you are, how successful you are. It's not about capitalism or materialism. It doesn't even centre feminism, although of course that is in there. The matriarchal system is taking care, looking after our innocent children of the future. If you are still here and you made it through this episode, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I am so aware it's a heavy, heavy conversation that we've had. I appreciate you so much for listening to the Bell Witch podcast. Have a gorgeous day, evening, night, whatever you were doing. Take care of yourself. Get some of that self-care going on. And stay magical, my dear witch. Snowdrops Near Susie's House by Alan McClure. No one told the snowdrops that the world is coming to an end, that there is no sense in trying any more, that the darkness has finally defeated the light, and ignorance of the truth they pushed once more through the mould and grit, raising their heads above the ground. Stopped me in my tracks. Oh yes, things used to live here. The one Scottish sun used to warm us, and the endless pounding rain slaked thirst, and pumped like blood into new life and hope. How did we forget? And they changed everything. No one told the snowdrops that the world is coming to an end, that there is no sense in trying any more, that darkness has finally defeated the light, and their ignorant truth they push once more through the mould and grit, raising their heads above the ground, stopping me in my tracks. Oh yes, things used to live here. The one Scottish sun used to warm us, and the endless pounding rain slacked first, and pumped like blood into new life and hope. How did we forget? And they changed everything. They changed everything. They returned the world to the state they need to be in. They are nodding heralds of the coming supernova, which will happen with or without us. This poem was introduced to Katherine by the brilliant Gail Johnson, who runs Writing for Wellbeing in Roundtrees Park in York, North Yorkshire.